Hi, and welcome back to the Comfort Table. I'm Teal, and this is Cian. And as you have probably surmised, or maybe we have revealed in our past videos, we actually graduated from NUS Architecture School quite a few years back. So, the purpose of this video would be to talk about some unhealthy habits we have picked up from architecture school and that we would not recommend you cultivating these habits, or perhaps maybe you should be aware that you may pick up these similar habits if you do find yourself in architecture school. So yeah, I guess
you can pick up some of this even without being in architecture school. So
but I guess it's like the environment of architecture school sort of makes it
very
easier
easy to pick up this.
So there are like 4 categories of habits: physical habits, mental or emotional ones, social, and I guess
the last one is just a general
yeah.
burnout environment.
So the first category would be physical habits. One, I guess, running meme or very famous impression of architecture school is that students are always sleep deprived. And
like zombies, or look at all these people, they forever stay in their studios and they don't ever go home, etc.
Yeah, so this, I guess, sleep deprivation, or not sleeping enough, is both glorified but also enabled because of that in that very small culture. So it's not exclusive to architecture school, of course, because for example, I think people in law also experience similar things, or like people in design, other design fields as well.
Yeah, so some of this are a bit more general and some of it are more specific to architecture. But in general, whatever the case is, I think the environment that we're in, which in our case was architecture school, right, further, made these bad habits continue, I guess. It made it easy to continue these bad habits. And now that we are out of architecture school and like working, adulting, whatever, not working, we look back on these habits that we have since moved on from, or try to move on from, and we are like, we kind of wish we didn't do all this.
Yeah, because obviously, as the title says, it's an unhealthy habit.
Yeah, so I guess you can kind of look upon this as like now us trying to give past us a bit of a heads up, like, hey, these things that you're doing are not that great for you.
Yeah, so sleep deprivation, I think you actually did pretty well on this. As in pretty well meaning you got enough sleep.
I would say I'm not the worst, but I definitely slept less than I should have. So
less than 8 hours.
So I think it also makes sense to figure out like outside of this, it makes sense to figure out how much sleep you need. Like for me, I need about 7 to 8 hours to be like healthy, like not groggy headed. But during architecture school, especially during the first 1 to 2 years, it was not uncommon for me to be sleeping about 4 to 6 hours every day. And then like towards deadlines, it could go down to like 2 hours. There were certain periods where I really tried my best to cut that down. But it was usually not very helpful because any lack of sleep that I have would be kind of like, the downside would be then I would need to take a nap, which kind of makes it like not useful in a sense, right?
Yeah. So I didn't do as well in the sleep aspect. Normally I need about 7 hours, but for most of architecture school I got only about 4 to 5. So I would go to sleep at around 3 or 4 and then wake up at like 8 for like a 9 o'clock class.
Yeah.
I think have class until like 8 in the evening or something.
I think specific habit aside, is the culture and the glorification of it being like, we are reducing sleep to work more on our projects, on our design.
And that sleep is for the weak.
Yeah. And
sleep is a waste of time.
Yeah, or like, that it's somewhat similar to grind or hustle culture in that sense. But
it's sort of like glorifying sacrificing your sleep for the sake of
your project or your passion or whatever you're trying to do. I think one of the very stark points was like very early on, within like first or second week of year 1, we were trying to find out what is an optimal nap time. So there were like charts that you can find on Tumblr. You can probably search it up. I don't know how much of it is accurate. Anyway, so it'll tell you like, you know, when you should wake up, because that would be when you are the least groggy, etc. I still know those numbers.
Oh no! Okay, I never looked it up, so it doesn't
I
apply
looked
to
it
me.
up. It's like 1.5 hours.
No.
Half an hour.
No.
It's all like crazy timings. Like you should not be sleeping 1.5 hours a day. Yeah. So anyway, my studio was passing the chart around.
No.
Okay. Anyway, so the next physical habit that is also pretty common and not specific only to architecture school
Is
too much coffee.
how much is too much?
So I think you have
I think we mentioned it.
Yeah, we mentioned it in one of the earlier videos, which we'll link
On our bodies
Yeah.
getting old.
Yeah, but I think the maximum that I've drank is maybe somewhere in the range of 3 to 4 cups a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one time I drank so much, and also coupled with the lack of sleep, that my hands were actually shaking so much I couldn't make my model. I couldn't like use my penknife because my hands were like.
Yeah, so I think like just coffee
Yeah.
itself, it comes together with the lack of sleep because you don't sleep enough, so
You
you need
usually,
coffee
like,
to wake yourself
counteract, right?
up,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so it's just a very bad negative cycle.
Not enough sleep, drink coffee.
And like you either fall
Coffee
asleep-
enables you to not sleep, and then
Yeah.
not sleep, you need
and then
more
you would
coffee.
suddenly crash when you don't have your coffee. Yeah, so it's just not a good cycle to pick up, but it's also unfortunately really common. Like in general, especially nowadays with like the hustle culture. Although I guess that has been sort of lessening due to like COVID. Kind of like people starting to realize that it's a really
Unhealthy.
an unsustainable cycle really.
Okay, so the third physical bad habit. This is specific to architecture, and I guess anyone, probably
I guess
industrial
if you-
design as well.
If you have some sort of workshop,
Workshop module.
Models
So
or
the
something.
habit is that you were exposed to a lot of toxic fumes and probably not very good safety standards.
yeah. So
Or I guess like, the safety standards are really hard to enforce, especially when students are there around the clock.
like 24/7.
Yes, not joking. Yeah,
Yeah, there are people who sleep in the studio as well.
I've been there, done that.
Sometimes you don't do it willingly, just do it because everybody's doing that and you don't have the presence of mind because you have not slept enough and you have too much
Yeah, so
caffeine
it's
in the
just kind of
system.
like you're in this
It's-
trance-like
you're just-
state, and you're
yeah.
just following the herd
Yeah, so
behavior.
we'll just share a bit of like the kind of toxic fumes that we personally encountered. So
Right.
things like glue.
Contact glue, especially the kinds that come in the cans. Oh my god, I remember I really like the smell of contact glue.
That's not that common. Yeah, most people don't like the smell. I don't like
But the thing is, I also like the smell of petrol. So when my parents pump gas at the station, I'll be like, yes. weird kid. Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Spray paint.
I don't like contact glue. Spray paint. To be fair, contact glue is not that common. We usually use other types of glue, but most of the time we use Yoo-hoo, because white glue doesn't hold. White glue is one of the ones that don't really have a smell, or very mild. Spray paint to spray on models, white or whatever color you need them to be, like metallic.
Sawdust.
Sawdust because we have wood related models, things to build. We also did concrete casting, and
So the scary thing about concrete powder, I guess, especially the ones with like fiberglass mixed in, right?
yeah.
Yeah, like apparently if you breathe it in, it'll just like solidify in your lungs and then cover all the
Very
things in
knowledge.
your lungs that help you extract
Exchange
oxygen.
gas. Yeah. And then there's also like fumes from laser cutting acrylic, which is a plastic, so there's like plastic fumes.
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
you-
if you laser cut paper, it's just like burnt paper smell, which is not the best,
Not
but
not that bad lah, I guess.
Not
it's like
as
if you
bad.
burn firewood, that kind of
yeah,
thing, right? So we also laser cut foam sometimes.
which is also a form of plastic, right?
And then there's, I think overall, right, the main problem with all this is not the use of it itself, but the fact that because we're expected to use all these materials or come into contact with all these materials and these methods of making things, right? But we are not really taught what to do for protective equipment or how to protect
I
ourselves.
mean, we did have a workshop tour, but So it's very difficult to enforce these safety standards, especially when students are there all the time.
Okay, that aside, right, I always felt a bit annoyed that like the industrial design students were taught to have respirators, like half mask, half face respirators, and I believe they also had goggles. Granted, not everyone wore goggles, but they at least were asked to all buy the safety equipment, so they were aware that they had to use them. Whether they actually use it properly is another question. But for the architecture students, there wasn't such a thing. The only safety rule we really had was that you had to wear covered shoes in the workshop, which had like saws and stuff like that. So they didn't manage to enforce having covered pants.
Yeah.
Which is another problem. But I think the lack of safety knowledge and the fact that everyone around you are also kind of like nonchalant about not using safety equipment makes it really easy to just be like, oh, it's fine, you know, it's fine to smell contact glue in your air-conditioned studio for 24 hours a day. Like, no, that's not okay.
Okay, so on to the next category of bad habits.
So I
emotional
think
and mental bad habits. Obviously, when you are in such a
physically
terrible environment, it goes to follow that, you know, you will also pick up bad internal habits. Yeah. So another thing that is specific to architecture is this culture where you are expected to devote yourself entirely to architecture, and it's seen as a calling and not really as
it's not just
a job.
Thing
it's not just a job. It is a calling that you must, you know, sacrifice yourself for the noble purpose of designing architecture.
And you're kind of expected to live and breathe architecture, which honestly I don't know, is it my fault or what? I didn't know or expect that. So when I went into architecture school, like the first day, when this was not specifically said but heavily implied in the introduction that the level coordinator gave, right? I was like,
so for example, if you have free time and you're reading a book, the book has to be about architecture or design. If you are on a holiday and you're traveling, you had better go to architecture like hotspots.
Yeah, you better physically visit that place because it is not the same as reading a book. But if you're in Singapore, you should be reading a book about the architecture of whatever you're interested in. Or like checking out design magazines or looking up Art Daily or whatever it is that I obviously do not look up because I do not remember all these things.
Or if you're walking around town, bring a sketchbook so you can do urban sketching or something. Whatever.
The thing is, the moment we went into architecture school, even if you don't have this expectation going in, you're just suddenly dumped into this like culture where the tutors expect this of you. And I guess the feeling of like, oh, I guess I better do this, so because I'm supposed to do what my course wants me to do, right? Like, I'm here to learn. This is what they are telling me to learn, and I guess I'll just try my best to do it. At least that was the attitude that I had going into it. So to me, it always felt like, oh, I don't feel this now, but I guess I will just try my best to do what they want me to do.
Yeah, so this kind of expected devotion
is very different from other courses where they are just like, oh, you came here to study,
just do your best to get good grades,
or science,
right?
Or humanities, or whichever other. A lot of other majors do not expect you to devote your life to this,
to your course of study.
Yeah, so it's a very strange notion that that was in this culture.
Part of this culture is enforced by your tutors.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the good points, I guess, of architecture school is that the tutors treat you as peers, or sort of like junior future peers instead of students. So while that is a good point, the flip side is that they're a lot more demanding, perhaps because of the expected devotion to this grand architectural course. And then when we have critiques or when they give feedback on your design progress, design presentation, they can be quite mean and harsh.
Because basically they expect you to just be a not as practiced architect to be, right? Whereas I guess in most courses of study, you are seen as a student.
Even in your first year for your first project, presentation, assignment, whatever.
Yeah, so it's very common that you are seen as just a architect in training. So it's that you have yet to gain this knowledge, but you will be treated as someone who wants to and will eventually obtain this knowledge and skill, right? So on one hand it's good, but I guess it may be quite similar to kind of like artisan or craftsman kind of teachings, but on the other hand, if you didn't know about this and didn't expect this,
some tutors can be overly harsh. Because there's criticism constructively, but there's also the kind that sort of like rips you down and
and it's not that easy to tell which is which sometimes, especially when you have not experienced the range of this and process that.
Yeah, sometimes it's quite common for people to actually start crying during critiques.
And we have critiques very often because like architecture school, you have one critic per semester, but usually it's at least two because there's at least one interim. And then if they break it down into like multiple projects, you will have interim and final critic based on the number of projects you have.
And
so
on,
it could be
on
like
top of that, you have consultation with your tutors twice a week where they will also tear you down.
I mean, depends
of course, in a one-on-one setting.
I think it also has to be said that like the two of us have somewhat similar personalities / working habits. So we do kind of
react to the same type of criticism in the same way.
Yeah, so our view might be quite biased because we also have like course-mates who reacted in a more positive manner to this environment, but I think
this kind of like education style, right?
Yeah, but I think the way that we have like been educated prior to architecture school and kind of like our upbringing and culture and maybe our own personality, how we handle stress and how we deal with things has kind of not been particularly helpful for architecture school.
We were very unprepared.
And I think the fact that we didn't really go in seeing it as a calling, you know.
Yeah. So you noticed that we were talking about the design, right? So one of the other things that's prevalent is that the design module or the design course is seen as the most important in your architectural education, and all the other things that you learn and you sit exams for or you do projects for, write reports for, is secondary. For example, like history, sustainability, construction techniques.
To give it some context for people who do not know what architecture school is like, or at least our
I think the common perception is like, oh, architecture school, what do? You draw lines, you design buildings, full stop.
Yeah, so I think our curriculum is quite different from like a lot of other majors.
I do think that architecture is actually one of the more holistic or interdisciplinary courses of study. What
I was saying earlier about the course structure is that for us, one of the core modules that you always have to take is a design module. No matter what, you have to take it every semester throughout your whole study period. And it is a double weightage module, so it is twice the weightage of all the other modules that we take, be it
twice the number of like credits.
So be it like history of Southeast Asian architecture, history of modern architecture, etc., or like sustainability principles or architectural construction. So these are all the other modules that we do, but design is throughout every semester and it is double the weightage. So if you do it like a optimized uni student, you would think like twice the amount of modular credit, twice the effort, right? But in practice, what we were saying just now about the glorification of the design module is that rather than just like twice the effort, it's more like 90% of your time and effort goes into design and the other 10% is for all your other 4 or 5 other modules that you're also supposed to take within a semester.
Yeah, it's not uncommon to like skip lectures
and
to do your design work, and I guess these people just read the lecture slides afterwards.
I think the downside to that, right, is even though in theory the whole curriculum is kind of like quite well structured, like interdisciplinary, the fact that people overemphasize the design module over all the other modules, which are supposed to still teach you things that you are supposed to apply to design, even like ethics,
very important,
right, which you will do in later years, or like architecture practice, like the actual practice
where you learn about like the codes and
so
the process to get like approvals.
So like people would skip lectures for all these other things, which are actually supposed to be like important for you
because they prepare you for the working life, right?
Yeah, but also I think a lot of tutors and maybe like the general population in school kind of view those as like extras, which kind of say something about the ethics of doing architecture, I feel, but
it also ties into you're expected to live and breathe architecture, so you don't really need to take a module to learn about history
because you're supposed to have learned about history. Okay, so my camera ran out of battery because I guess it didn't want us to film. It didn't want to film us talking about architecture.
It had enough.
But anyway, we're doing this on my phone, so the video quality is not as great, but we'll just continue. Earlier we were saying how design module or like design itself is over prioritized over other modules, and like I think this is the case even for like moving on into the industry when you are practicing, although the architect or the architect to be is meant to be I guess studying and learning about all these other things like sustainability and ethics and like
keeping up with current trends,
right? But the fact is that on a day-to-day basis you're really mostly doing design, and it's really up to the individual person whether they are continuously updating their own knowledge. And like, let's face it, you're working, you're tired, you have family, you may have kids, you may be a parent, like it's a bit too much to expect.
Which is where the calling and the devotion and the live and breathe architecture thing comes in, because you ought to have incorporated this as part of your life by then.
Yeah, but I mean, if we are being honest and if we are, compassionate human beings, you would realize that this is quite difficult and rather unsustainable. And honestly, I think that, the industry being like this and the schooling of it being like this is like, I guess it's kind of preparing you for the work life, but it was not great. Let's just
it's an unhealthy environment priming you for an unhealthy environment.
Yeah, basically it's
that's enough about the school culture environment. So the working environment as well.
We don't have that much first-hand experience.
But like the school is like a microcosm of the working environment, right? So
our tutors are also most of them are practicing
instead of like researchers, lecturers teaching.
Yeah, so because majority of them are practicing, they carry with them the same kind of thinking that a lot of the industry has.
The values,
Yeah, I think one thing that I want to mention about the industry, I don't want to go too deeply into it because I don't have much first-hand experience about working in the industry.
Because you didn't actually work in an architectural practice, right? You worked in more
technically did for a very short time, but okay, anyway, let's not go into it. Suffice to say, I don't feel qualified to talk about it, but I think the part that really struck me as I signed up for like the professional practice for architecture, right, and like realizing, because I was preparing to really like work in the industry, in the position that I was at, and then I realized that this is a really professional job
it's a professional degree. Yes.
You would think of doctors, lawyers, and also
dentists.
Yeah. So basically, right, the way doctors are expected to both have their medical practice first, but also constantly keep up with all the changing research and new information, right? Architects are also meant to be constantly reading up or like learning about the new updated codes, practices, like any research could be technical or could be about communities, could be about ethics, could be about
competitions, material.
But there's also, of course, the legal part of it, right, where you have to at least know the codes, building codes in the country that you practice in or where you have your license in, because that concerns your legal liabilities as an architect if you are certified, right? So like the certified architects, even after getting certification, which is you don't get certification just by coming out of school, you have to practice for a certain number of years, pass an exam and interview, and I have no idea what else, and then maybe you'll get certified, right? So that in itself, right, or you have to, prove that you have all this log of things that you've done, projects that you've done. So that in itself is difficult, and realizing that even after doing that and getting your professional certification, you have to constantly attend lectures, attend talks and things like that to show that you have updated your training, really made me realize that this is a professional job. Like, it is a professional, not just in the regular sense of the word, but professional in the sense that like you would call a doctor a professional, right?
It is a accredited title.
Yeah, so me realizing that made me realize how deep this job / calling
how significant
and how serious the responsibilities are. And like, I think you don't initially feel that if you just go into architecture school.
Yeah.
And like, as somebody who did not really go into this thinking that it's my calling,
it's a bit like too heavy.
Yeah, like I deliberately did not choose medicine and like law, even though my grades would have qualified me for it, but I may not have passed the interview. But anyway, I deliberately didn't choose it because I didn't want the responsibility, which kind of sounds bad, but like it's honestly just too much responsibility for me to handle. And realizing that I have stumbled into another professional degree, right? Honestly, I just didn't know better.
Yeah, so the bad habit that comes out of this is that despite this being a position of such importance, and
responsibility, high responsibility,
a lot of architects, I guess architectural associates, are underpaid and overworked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even after they have been certified architects and then they get a significant pay raise because now they can, sign off on projects. I guess the amount that they are paid
for the risk that they're taking.
Yeah, and for the number of hours that they work it's
not comparable to other professionals like lawyers and doctors or even engineers.
Yeah.
So I think it's the fact that, and it sounds very simple when just say sign off, but knowing that, let's say, if a building collapses
and someone dies, you will be held liable.
Depending on the issue, right?
Yeah.
But you could potentially be held liable depending on what the issue is. And like, that severity is much more than I imagined when I first started the school. So because once you actually practice and you know that this is on the back of your mind, right, I guess it makes sense that the tutors actually
are so harsh,
because it makes sense that they would be harsh because or like have very high expectations, because it is a very important role or important position.
You always have to be on guard.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, coming from the angle of like, I just chose this major because I didn't know what else to choose for my university degree. I'm really not saying that one is better than the other. It's just that, this is my position because I never really saw architecture as a calling. And therefore, like, when these two positions clash, it's what happened.
I don't think this is actually a habit though?
It's not a habit, but I think it's the underpinning of like why people are very harsh, and also the prioritization of the design module over everything else, right? It continues in professional practice, and therefore it makes sense that it carried over in schooling, because our tutors were professional architects. So like they were not doing this on purpose, I think, but as a result of that environment, we kind of, and also the people around us, I guess, because there are also people who are very passionate about architecture, like the
Yes.
students. So as a result of like these more vocal people, right, be it our tutors or the people who actually see architecture as a calling, it's very common to prioritize design over other modules, and also over prioritize design over like your own life, like your school life, or like, you know, whatever, family life.
Yeah.
So I guess we went on a bit of a sidetrack of why that habit could be the case, but like really it's the over prioritization of like design over everything else, even though design is such a big word. Because to me, and it could be a slant that I find that ethics is very important, and that is something that is almost always glossed over in architecture.
To be fair though, that is what you did for your
for my dissertation. And slightly for thesis, I guess, but
so it's something
it's a slant
closer
that
to your heart. Yeah.
But it's also a slant that I think ideally more people should have.
Yeah, but of course this, because it's only applicable to the architecture industry, once you remove yourself from this environment, you're not really subject to this mentality. Actually, wait, no, let me take that back. Because this is so prevalent within the industry, people from outside the industry also have this idea that architecture is only about design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which it is not, but
which is very reductive.
It is understandable why they would think it. Yeah, so I'm not going to go into why I think it's not the case, but we don't have time for it.
Yeah, so even though I have removed myself quite early on from the architecture side of things, I still get the fallout effect of people thinking that architecture is just only design? About design, just design.
Yeah.
Which is a detriment.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to do like a very short sidetrack, but like if you go into Singapore's history in like post-independence, that period, there are a lot of very interesting architects who are really pioneers in the way of how they think and trying to shape society, which was then a very
because post-war, right?
Nation trying to build itself up. And the thinking of like the architects back then, like trying to build the science center, build National Theatre, build like even the transport system, the MRT, you know, that viaduct shape, right, is actually done by an architect to make it look slimmer so that it's not too heavy, doesn't, you know, look like an eyesore and things like that. So like the philosophy carrying all these design ideals are closer to what I hope architecture would be like.
About, yeah.
But unfortunately that's not really what I see on a more like current day-to-day basis. So yeah, there are good points about architecture, just maybe not in the way we've experienced it through our schooling and what we have of like what I had of like working. So the third category of bad habits are under social. So I think this kind of feed in from the physical and the mental and emotional one, where because we all hang out together in school or in studio specifically, we kind of further propagate all these unhealthy habits with each other, because it's like, I'm not sleeping, hey, you're not sleeping too.
It's a very toxic, closed environment.
Yeah, it's kind of basically an echo chamber in the worst way possible. And like generally you would not be particularly happy because you're not living a life that is particularly sustainable, right? So everybody would be like, I'm feeling terrible, then like, oh, I'm feeling terrible too, and it's like,
yeah, we both feel terrible.
Yeah, so I think like that effect of hanging around a lot of people who are all not feeling that great because of all this mental and physical habits that we have picked up is not that great, because usually you try to turn to other people around you for like support. But in such a situation, people don't have the support for themselves already, right, it's very difficult to be able to support someone else, and it's entirely understandable but also entirely unhealthy for the people in it. And unfortunately, this in schooling also carries on into real life while working. I think there's still a tendency to be... Of course, I think people who are working have a bit more of a realistic cap on things, being like, I'm working so that I can pay for stuff. But unfortunately, I think the underlying idea of like, I have to sacrifice for architecture because it's a important endeavor is still something that kind of runs underneath this situation. So
finally, the last habit. Now you know the context and the environment of the school and the practice. Obviously, it's not... You can imagine that it's common that people would develop burnout or depression or anxiety. Burnout from having to do so much work.
Yeah.
Being criticized all the time. Yeah.
So I think it's not really a habit, like people don't make it a habit to be burnout, but I think there's a common situation where a lot of people are burnt out and people don't realize also that they're burnt out
because
while
being
in the
burnt,
situation.
when you're burnt out and everyone else around you is
you feel like you're normal.
Yes.
Because everyone is burnt out. So I think that cycle of unhealthy behaviors again, negative echo chamber. Yeah, so there's also a bit of like, because architecture school is 5 years for us, there's a bit of this idea of like no quitting, or that you have already spent so many years in school and you just have this many years to graduate that you shouldn't drop out.
Yeah.
This idea of like, even though you're burnt out, just, bear with it, get through it. This particular one is a bit more of a bad habit, or like a fallacy, I guess.
Yeah, I think this wouldn't be so bad if, like in the US, architecture was a postgraduate degree or something, I believe.
Not entirely sure, I didn't really check it up, but...
Or in countries where education is free and then you can, change course, change university a lot more freely. But in Singapore, there's this sort of rat race mentality where you go to university to get a degree, so you can get a job.
Try and get out of uni as quickly as you can.
So you can start working as fast as possible, start earning money as soon as possible.
So that culture of thinking combined with like the negative echo chamber that we have
sort of produces the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like, you can't quit now.
Yeah, so it's like you at some point you do realize that you're burnt out or you feel really horrible, but you don't dare to quit.
And you don't dare to take a gap year because that's like you're losing opportunity.
There are people who take
time.
Gap years. In fact, we do know of people who have taken gap years, but I think for the majority of people, it is either not considered as an option because of the culture that we grew up in Singapore,
or they don't really have the financial means to take a year off.
Yeah, because they need to like get out
work
and get work
ASAP.
Yeah. Or like, it just feels so horrible that you are hoping, I will just finish one more year and I'll be out. Without considering, like, when you're in a negative space, it's kind of hard to figure out how to get out of it, I would say. So that was kind of a lot of our thinkings back then.
This actually applies to me because I was burnt out
very
early on, sometime in my 3rd year, and then I just thought like, okay, next term I'm gonna get like the first part of the accreditation. Fine, I'll just like take it, and then the semester after that I was going on exchange, so it was like a good point, right?
Half a year.
Like, your grades will be frozen, so that was a good thing.
You just keep trying to get yourself to the next milestone.
Justify to yourself that, it'll soon be over. So after I came back from exchange, it was like, okay, it's just like 1.5 more years. I've already done like 3.5 years. What is 1.5 more years? That kind of like justification to yourself.
I guess that thinking of like, if I just do a bit more, like, but
if I just hang on a bit longer.
it's almost as if quitting is not an option, or quitting is a negative route to take, or like an undesirable route to take. But
I think also because of our educational experiences up till that point, we couldn't really take failure or like take dropping out of school as an option. Like we couldn't really see ourselves doing that.
Yeah, and I think I also had other obligations that required me to finish the education and continue working after that, so I couldn't really just change things on a whim.
Yeah.
But to be fair, you know, like, as much as I say this, if you had recognized this earlier, even if there are still ways out, because I know of people who have changed their course from architecture to something else while in the same situation that I was, just that they changed it really early. But I didn't think about that, and also they're my junior, so I didn't know that was an option until much later. It's the fact that I didn't think that there were other options, like changing courses, because I was thinking, oh, I have an obligation to finish this course that I've chosen.
Yeah, I too felt that way.
Yeah, and some of it is like you know, contractual, and some of it is like cultural. Yeah. But whatever the case is, it doesn't mean that it's any less, you know, binding in your mind.
Yeah, so one of my friends dropped out of architecture, but that was because she was so stressed that she developed medical problems.
Yeah.
That made her, you know, have to drop out. Yeah,
and in hindsight, right, so it's taken us we have graduated architecture school for the same amount of time that we have been in architecture school while we're filming this.
So strange to think about it that way.
Yeah, but I think it has taken us time also to look back on these bad habits and realize that they are, first of all, not helpful habits for us, and trying to undo some of them and learn better ones, and to be able to get to a place where we can actually, you know, reflect on these habits hasn't been easy, and I think it's something that we will not have been able to do with our mentality at that place in time. Yeah, at that point in time.
I think another reason why we didn't think of quitting was that our grades weren't that bad. You had good grades actually. I had like slightly above average.
Yeah, grades. So it's kind of weird, but there's like another baggage that's not particularly related to architecture in itself, but more of I guess being a good exam taker. I think we mentioned it briefly in our burnout videos of like overachievers or high achievers. I think both of us have been pretty high achieving for most of our like school life up to that point. And technically I was still high achieving in architecture school, but
so architecture school was actually the first time I faced academic failure. Although I didn't fail, but I didn't do as well as I expected myself to, which was a hard blow to take, hard pill to swallow.
I think if anything, the fact that I didn't do actively worse did not help my mental struggles of feeling like, hey, you know, it's kind of like looking at the results and being like, the results are not that bad, you know, like my exam results and my coursework results, whatever you want to call it. But I was really suffering in the process of it. And because I was so used to like using the results to kind of justify the progress or the process, no matter how terrible it was, because that's kind of how like I grew up, I guess. Then the fact that my results were not reflecting how terrible I felt made me feel like maybe I shouldn't feel that terrible. So like honestly, that was not a very good cycle.
You know, good grades means you're coping well, means
So honestly, that was something that I had a very, very hard time to wrap my head around, because like we mentioned in the High Achievers Burnout video, just because you're high achieving doesn't mean that the process was any less difficult. And in this particular case, the process was actually terrible. But it didn't show in the results. And given my relatively immature thinking at a point in time...
You were just like gaslighting yourself, right?
Basically, yeah. So it was not a very healthy mental space to be in. And of course, it could also be the fact that, you know, we were like young. We were like 18, 19,
I think 20. Towards the end, we weren't that young anymore.
I mean, we were in our early 20s. Late 10s and early 20s studying, right? And then like now with more age and experience, we can look back and realize, hey, those were not very healthy habits to have, but it's also very difficult to be able to have realized that when we were that age.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
because this was the first time we were encountering something like this.
Yeah, basically, honestly, architecture school is just an experience that I don't have anything else similar to compare it to, and I'm kind of glad I don't. But also, like, I don't really want to experience it again, even though it has taught me quite a bit. So I have very mixed feelings about architecture school.
I regret it, but also I don't regret it.
Yeah, that's something that maybe we will unpack more in future videos if we get around to it, but we wanted to keep it a bit more short, which, yes, this is a short video on architecture because we have a lot more to say, but I think we'll keep it as this for now. I think if you're not from architecture school, I feel like saying good for you, but
it's good for them, right?
But I guess the thing is, like, you know, some of this is also applicable to a lot of other, like, hustle culture or, you know,
startup culture.
Yeah, there are some similarities to a lot of other cultures that create a lot of structural burnout. Like, the system itself creates a lot of burnout, but I think we wanted to speak about it from a very specific place in our lives, which is, you know, architecture school from when we were a certain age, and with, you know, a relatively high achieving school history up to then. It's a very situational thing, but also not. So I don't know whether there's any good insights that you can take from this, but it's a video that we felt like we had to make.
Yeah. And that we were able to make now that we have more or less come to terms with the trauma, I will use this word, that we were subjected to.
We do have a lot of thoughts on architecture school, but I don't know whether we are prepared to share all of them with the internet. Hopefully you can learn better habits than what we had. Let us know if any of these habits are also similar to anything else that you have experienced. I would be a very different person without architecture school. I would not be the person that I am right now, but at the same time, if I had a choice to choose it all over again, I'm not sure I would have chosen architecture school given my current knowledge.
Yeah.
So I hope we have normalized talking about negative things, even if as it is difficult, and
that you don't always have to end on a positive note.
I mean, that was the aspiration of this channel, really, to have this
open conversations.
Yeah, even about difficult things. If you found it hard to process this video, it's okay. We spent 5 years to even get to this stage. We'll come back with another lighthearted video in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, so see you guys then. Thanks for watching. Bye.